Thank you everyone for the opportunity to speak to you about what I consider a very exciting topic. Thanks very much to Dan and Rob for setting the regulatory context in some of our neighboring jurisdictions presently and over time. Now this slide has absolutely nothing to do with my presentation. I just think it's really funny. We recently went through park signage standards for the City of Vernon, and I threw my ideas into the pot, but I don't see this on any of our final signs, so I guess they didn't go with my ideas, and that's probably a good thing in this particular case. It was really interesting hearing Rob talk about his excitement when he read our regulations and legislation pertaining to the development of OCPs, particularly in the context where he's come from that doesn't have that vehicle for high-level strategic planning. And he sees positive terms like facilitate, encourage, promote. It's got very wide-reaching powers in terms of protecting the environment and explicitly addressing sprawl. And I've been a local government planner for over 20 years, and in my experience, an OCP is just what you make of it. I've seen OCPs in communities that the only people who knew what that meant was a long-range planner or perhaps the director of planning that knew, oh yeah, that document's back there, the land use plan we got to follow, but what's the rest of it? At the opposite end of the spectrum, there are communities where an OCP is front and central, where the community holds their council accountable to decisions and amendments to that document and look upon it as the guiding path to the vision that they've identified. And there's everything in between. If you look at any community in this province that has a sprawl problem, I can practically guarantee you it's got an OCP in place that either accommodated that sprawl or facilitated that sprawl. An OCP document can also be very easily amended. Even the very best document you could come out of with comprehensive consultation and every expert in the world, if that document is continually amended, where that's just treated as an order of business, the document's not going to be worth much at the end of the day. And finally, just because you can't act inconsistently with an official community plan, nothing says you actually have to do what's in the plan. And that's a very fine-grained distinction. So for example, your plan might contain a policy statement about we should be hiring a TDM coordinator. Well, unless council tries to adopt a policy that says we will never hire a TDM coordinator, you're not acting contrary to the plan if you don't ever do it. So those are some of the overarching pitfalls that when people go into the development of an OCP, these are the things you need to be cognizant of that you need to be drafting that document for. Because at the end of the day, an OCP can be a powerful tool to control and direct the growth of our communities so that they are sustainable and resilient over time. And most importantly, a document that will take us in our current sprawl, and I don't mean to oversimplify why we do this or all the dimensions of sprawl, but for the purposes of what time I've been left, we're just gonna treat it like we want a document that's gonna get us out of sprawl. How do we do that? Well, the vision, once that's identified, the real trick is how to get from point A, what's on the ground, to point B, that vision you see in the future. And this is a long game. So if your idea of a long time is a year, you probably should not be developing and implementing OCPs. For me, right away is 6 months. Okay? So your document going forward, it's got to be able to stand the test of time. And it can be used to hold local government accountable. And in my experience in working as a local government planner, there is power in the people. They can say and do things to council that I could never say and keep my job. You want those people on the side of your OCP. So I've been tasked with talking about how we can do that, how we can build an OCP under our current regulation and what that would look like. But I would argue strongly that at the end of the day, the OCP is only one piece of the puzzle. If you will, to use a jigsaw puzzle metaphor, your OCP is the perimeter pieces. They set the parameters. But unless you fill that puzzle in with amending your bylaws and adopting new policies to actually implement that plan, the vision will never be visible. So how do we do that? I've learned a few lessons in developing official community plans, 6 of them to be precise, that I'd like to share with you today. And the first of those is context is everything. So if you're a young and enthusiastic planner or an old enthusiastic planner like myself, you've got these great ideas, you're exposed to best principles, you talk to other planners, you go to conferences, you're like, this is a great idea. How can I make this work in my community? And if you don't work with the actual fabric of your environment at a built, constructed level, as well as the community and its readiness to go forward in certain areas, it's not going to work. And it's really important that the document that's developed works, because it needs to stand that test of time. So how do we get from A to B? Let's talk about Vernon, BC as a case study, circa mid-2000s. How many of you have been to Vernon before? Okay. How many of you never been to Vernon? Oh, that hurts, eh? We have to correct that, Rob. If you've been to Vernon, chances are this is what you think of when you think of Vernon. And this is what it looks like when you drive to Vernon. We're about 45 minutes north of Kelowna on the highway. But if you live in Vernon, this is the Vernon that you know and love. It is a valley community with a historic agriculture and forest economy. It is nestled, and that is the word, by these beautiful rolling hills. 3 lakes, Okanagan, Kalamalka, Swan Lake. Hiking, outdoor activities, skiing. You can be at the ski hill from downtown Vernon in 20 minutes and ski with a view of the Monashees. This is the north arm of Okanagan Lake, one of our public beaches. Oldest running winter carnival in Western Canada, and it is a lot of fun. That strong agricultural background. Vernon's also a working class town. The average household income in Vernon runs about $10,000 less than the BC average. It's also older than the BC average. It's a very beautiful place to retire. These things are pertinent in understanding your context and the lay of the land. And you may have heard of this little thing called Predator Ridge. It's this little golf thing we got going on. That's also up there. So what was the land use plan in effect in the mid-2000s? In this case, this is the adopted land use plan. All of the new growth and development identified for the community were on those greenfield hillsides that you saw in that picture. All of these amorphous polygons there are designating slopes less than 30%. And the text that went with that designation said, basically, bring us a neighborhood plan and we'll look to change the OCP designation and give you zoning. And that's how we got Turtle Mountain, the Rise, and Predator Ridge. Development driven, private property owner driven. So let's play this out. What is that going to look like over time? This was 2007 Vernon. And there's actually one of you in this room that was around while we did this. So you recognize these graphics, Melinda. It's nice that I drug them out, eh? So this was our population distribution by density. And as you can see, low pink, 1 to 2, 3 people per area, per acre. This is the downtown. Each of these little black dots is a dwelling. So we play out 25-year plan, what that's going to look like in 25 years. That's what it's going to look like. And all of those greenfield hillsides, surrounded, filled with houses, with little to no redevelopment in the downtown area. And every one of these needs a road, sewer, storm, water, lights, schools, ambulance service, all the bells and whistles that come with it. And if you've been in planning for more than 5 minutes in this country, you've heard about the infrastructure crisis. Why do we have that? I suggest the inordinate effort on sprawl and building the roads. In the chasing our tail, we need more assessment base, so we need to build more units. And where are we going to do that? There's a lovely flat field that looks good. Here we are today. The red indicate the new units in that plan in 25 years. Notice the lack of red units in the built-up part of the town. So what happens in communities that continue to spread at the end without redeveloping? What happens to their downtowns? Yeah, exactly. So that was not the land use plan you were looking for. How do we find a land use plan that we're looking for? And that goes to my second most important lesson, is the power of the people. Also circa 2000s in Vernon. Some of you may be familiar, there was a little bit of an issue with the mayor. Now, if you know the story, you don't need me to tell you. If you don't know the story, the very short version is the mayor got ousted. He wasn't very popular. And all of council went with him. And a new mayor and a new council were brought in. In that same community, with that same reduced average household rate, was watching those developments in the hillsides be filled up, these beautiful hills that they've grown up with, being covered by houses with driveways with red and white license plates in them. Because if you know anything about hillside development, you know it's expensive, first and foremost. This was the discovery of Vernon as a second home, of its wonderful four-season climate and its natural amenities and its amazing beauty. So you had a very pissed off community. And sometimes we jump into things as planners and you don't even realize what a benefit it is in terms of what's happening around until you're in the middle of it. And Margaret Mead said, paraphrasing, "Never doubt the ability of a small group of people to change the world, for indeed it's the only thing that ever has." Never underestimate the doubt of a small group of pissed off people to hold their government accountable and demand change. And that's what I walked into. It was a long-range planner's dream. The power of the people means you must engage them, and you must engage them meaningfully. It is not an open house. It is you bring them in at the beginning of the process, you enact a vision, you build a vision, an iterative process, not a one meeting and put it in front of council. No, you go through, you talk to as many people in the community as you can. You build that vision and you get the community to buy in, all in. Sometimes we want to consult on stuff that is very technical. Should we use a development agreement for this or a phase development agreement? It's like the community cares. What they care about is the kind of community they want to live in. And if we get their buy-in for that, that just sets the course for the rest of it. And it will help hold council accountable in the end, and we'll talk about that as we go through the presentation. And it'll also help ease the redevelopment cycle by having that buy-in. But I can't stress this enough. When I had an opportunity to talk to a room full of planners, I have to say this. If you consult without meaningful follow-up, you have done a disservice to every planner that comes after you. The average people that we deal with don't care for government. Let's be honest, most of us don't care for government, and we're very suspicious when they show up at our door with a survey or ask us to take part in a workshop or come to an open house and fill out our survey. When we overcome that resistance and get them to meaningfully participate, if they don't see payoff at the end of that, the next planner that shows up with, "I got a survey," they're gonna be like, "Forget it." And we need those people involved, as we're talking about. So, for example, when we finished this whole process and the team went, what can we immediately put on the ground? How about 30 kilometers of painted on-street bike lanes? Immediate win, affordable. Everybody in the community could see it, that sort of thing. And that follow-up is really, really important. How many of you have ever walked into a public hearing with this many people and went, "Oh yeah, tonight's gonna be great"? Only if that was your first public hearing. We know what this means. You see that many people in a public hearing, you're like, this thing's probably going down. At the very least, it will be delayed. At the very worst, it will be denied. Prepping our community, having them work through that process. To this day, that growth strategy in that OCP was developed in 2007 and adopted in 2008. We still have people come to public hearings with the OCP saying, this proposal is not in line with this, and this is what we said we wanted. Man, as a planner 8 years in, you can only dream about that, right? That's exactly what you want. Because council, well, they don't really care about Kim. But they'll care about this one lady screaming and crying about the safety of her children. And we've all seen that, right? And she carries the day. Sorry, you're just the closest. Third lesson. Your land use plan is fundamental. It is key. It's the part of the document that all current planners will use. It's the one part of your document that will be referred to, because it's usually the part that says whether you can build what you want or you can't. And if you can't, the lengthy process you have to go through to amend to build what you want. The development of a good, solid land use plan is about understanding the fabric of your community, where your community is at in terms of readiness, and all of your policy. And I know that might sound weird. You're like, it's a land use map. But your development is the primary realization of the policies and vision that you will have incorporated into your land use map. Your land use map will identify those areas of redevelopment and intensification, and whether you're going to allow development at the fringes of that in greenfield areas. Those are all big principal policy things embedded in that. And if you can get those on your map, you've just taken a giant step towards successful implementation of your plan. It's also critically important to balance the interests of the private property owner and the vision. Because if we stand on principle every single time, there's a good chance you're not going to win at the end of the day. And once the plan starts to become amended and starts to lose trust of the community and the development community, then you've got trouble. Because again, that OCP has got to work over time. This is, I've got a little list of things I've learned in my time as a planner, and this is one of them. There's always too much regulation when I want to develop, but there's never enough when my neighbor wants to develop. How can you let him do that? Why won't you let me do that? And those are the things that you have to translate into your policy. Do I want to stand on principle? Yeah, in this case, again, it took us 100 years to get to this point. I argue it's going to take us another 100 years to get out of it. So we got to work accordingly. So at the end of the day, with that public engagement and that community context, what land use plan did we end up with? So all these polygons here, these greenfield come and build, are gone. All of them. The plan effectively removed greenfield subdivision potential. 3 elections this plan's gone through. 3 elections, it's been a question posed to the candidates. Will you support the OCP? And 8 years later, and 3 years, 3 elections, and 1 OCP review, and we have the same growth strategy in place. Fine little tuned amendments, but it's the same strategy. So we're out of the gate in a very positive way. Now, what's really important is not the colors on this particular map. It's actually these black lines. You notice those black lines aren't here. Or what these lines are, basically, all of the different policies in that plan as they apply to 3 new DP areas in our city. And these policies apply throughout our bylaw amendments, up through the subsequent policies that we developed, and even our development application process. So now there's consistently a set of criteria if you want to develop here, and a set if you want to develop here, and another set if you want to develop out here. There's a number of different changes and amendments and policies we had to adopt to entrench that moving forward, but it's all embedded in those lines. This is what we had in 2007. Every black dot was a dwelling. You saw this already. That was the build out of the 2007 plan to 2031. This was one we explored with the community because they're afraid of density, right? Okay, well, here you go. We know how many people are coming. So that's what it looks like if you spread them out. You see all these dots up in the hills? Whether there's 10 people there or 1,000, we still got to build the roads and everything that go with it, right? And we worked the community through that process. And at the end of the day, this is the land use plan that they endorsed. Look at all these new red dots in the built-up area. New neighborhood center there. Another way that looks, that was what they were going to get, Vernon was going to get based on the old OCP. See all these on the hills. Not a lot downtown. The blue or the new. The plan they adopted. But all this redevelopment, intensification. We still will have development up here in the hills, but it's not unfettered any longer. There are more policies. There are more costs that are associated genuinely and truly with greenfield development far from the city center. If I'm going to build an apartment building downtown, I'll even rebuild your sidewalk, curb, and gutter for you, no charge, right? But if I'm building up on that hillside, chances are I'm going to want you to have a DCC project, maybe even latecomer it, and heaven knows what. It's going to cost a fortune, right? Lesson number 4. I keep talking about the middle of the puzzle and the different supporting policies. If you adopt an OCP, even an awesome one, perfect, and don't enact policy amendments or bylaw changes after, I strongly suggest your OCP is not going to get much traction, hardly at all. It's where the rubber hits the road that counts. Your OCP provides a platform to do all the things that excited Rob. You can put policies in to protect your agriculture, to support affordable and attainable housing, to put additional requirements on for OCP amendments, for asset management, a big one, heritage conservation, alternative transportation, environmental protection, boundary extension, hillside guidelines, redevelopment. You can set all that policy you can set the stage for it in the OCP, but if you don't bring forward policies in front of council that start with pursuant to policy 17.3 in the OCP, here is a proposed policy to protect ALR lands. And in the case of Vernon, that policy that was subsequently implemented to provide the policy structure for what the OCP said, if you're class 1, 2, and 3 ALR lands, council will not even hear your application. No. Okay, awesome. That all started from an idea and a vision. Now every time that application comes forward, it's not whether somebody remembers to look at the OCP or not, it's in council policy. This is a biggie. Lesson number 5, the supporting bylaw amendments. Because if you're zoning, your DCC bylaw, your subdivision servicing bylaw doesn't reflect what you've put in your OCP, again, it's going to be an uphill battle the whole way. Because it is the built environment, largely by private developers, that will realize the physical environment of your plan. So if these bylaws don't reflect your plan, how do you expect to see that developed? And just as an example, I'll use top 2 zoning bylaw. Redevelopment's tough. And in the area around the city center area, we had a lot of 50-foot wide lots with little tiny old houses that were ready to take down 30 years ago. So what did we do? We designated those areas as small lot, single and 2 family. Then we created zoning districts predicated on exactly those dimensions to facilitate subdivision into 25-foot lots that would accommodate either single family or 2 family dwellings. Density up in the medium density range, but providing critically a housing form that the previous OCP did not provide. Housing for families that live and work in Vernon 12 months of the year. You know, there was so much approved in those hillside areas. There is enough residential zoned potential in those hillside areas as a result of the previous growth strategy to serve Vernon's entire projected growth rate for 50 years. And yet you saw the build out and how little of that was in the area of the flatland areas, the city center, in areas where families could actually afford it. That is a gross mismatch for what your land might be capable of doing, but what your community actually needs. The small lot single and 2 family encourage redevelopment of the infrastructure in the town center. It's replacing that. It's providing the form that families want with their front door and their backyard. It's providing it adjacent to schools, services, so maybe they don't need 5 cars, each with an annual average operating cost of $9,000. And smaller homes on smaller sites are not only inherently more affordable, they're cheaper to heat and cool. One of my colleagues somewhat disparagingly referred to these as Kim's gingerbread houses. And that's fine. But that's all that goes in to Kim's gingerbread houses. All of those considerations. And what do they look like in an OCP? Colors on a map. Development cost charges bylaw. Pre-2007, Vernon had 1-door flat fee. Little apartment in the downtown, 6,000 square foot house in the hill, didn't matter, same cost. What? We changed that. Dan and his gang helped us completely redo our DCC bylaw once the OCP was done and moved to a by size of the unit, little pays less than big, and by area of the city. So you pay the lowest DCCs for commercial and residential in our city center, and you pay the highest in the hillside agriculture and residential area. DP requirements, just to skip over, we get to the done here. If you really want to make your design guidelines count in all those neighborhood plans, put them in your OCP in the DP section. Boom, you're done. Lesson number 6, and my final lesson, and this one's important, at least the lessons I've learned. So when I arrived in Vernon in 07, and this is not to be disparaging to Vernon at all, and a lot of what was in that OCP pre-2007 was excellent. Excellent policy, excellent heritage conservation, but it lacked the teeth to see that stuff or the subsequent implementation to actually make that work on the ground. And we brought a lot of that into our new OCP and the new growth strategy. But one thing that really struck me when I first opened up that document, the first page, not surprisingly, was a list of amendments. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, there's 6 amendments. I flipped the page and there's 2 pages more of amendments. And then I flipped the page and it's like, are you kidding me? What's the point of a document you're going to amend almost 100 times in 12 years? Well, why even bother having the document? And all of that public consultation and all the concern that exactly that was going to keep happening. What assurances do we have that what happened before isn't going to happen again, that you're not going to somehow approve a new subdivision in our hillside as a result of this? All right, the Local Government Act, work with that. What can we actually do? Aha, annual amendments. All right, we'll allow, of course, you got to have the opportunity to have the document amended, but let's make it a once-a-year thing. We'll do it in the spring. We have to have our applications in by March 1st, and what we ever have, we will do it once. We'll do it at that time of the year, so the whole committee or the whole community can see what the impact on that document is by these proposed amendments. We put in a few exceptions to the annual consideration, one for our neighborhood plan areas. Obviously, it's a neighborhood plan area. We want to see it develop, and we don't want to see it held up because of this policy. The other clause we put in was if it had significant community benefit, then we would look at it outside the annual consideration. And that one had this wonderful unintended consequence of developers coming forward with large-scale projects proposing a certain percentage of affordable or attainable rental or market units. That was a significant benefit that got them out of the annual exclusion. Fantastic. Because, you know, it's like trying to get developers to do that. Well, here they were coming and saying, well, I'll make 15% of the units low market rental for 20 years. Boom, we're done. Excellent. So sometimes you don't know how the effects of these policies might be until you try them out and play them out. So my 6 lessons or 6 components of building a successful OCP in this province with our legislation and regulations, and that successful plan, in my understanding, the way I see it, as a document that's going to guide my community from today and the problems it struggles with to the sustainable, resilient community that my community has envisioned for itself, and to play the long game with that it's going to stay in place and have those effects. Understand the context of your community, significant public engagement throughout the development of the plan and in the application or the implementation of it, the land use plan that can stand the test of time, strong supporting policies and strong supporting bylaw amendments, and make it hard to amend. Thank you very much for your time.